Welcome back to the Commerce Collective podcast brought to you by Flywheel. You're listening to This Month Above the Fold, a monthly series on the Commerce Collective feed where Patrick Miller, co-founder of Flywheel, and I cover the most important commerce topics each month, and this is your August 2025 episode. I'm Emma Irwin, brand marketing manager at Flywheel and host of this podcast. I apologize on being late with this episode. Our trusty audio producer, who has produced every single episode of this podcast ever, went on vacation. That was crazy. All right, today we are covering Walmart ending its exclusive partnership with The Trade Desk, the true end of the de minimis tax exemption, and some more thoughts on agentic AI. Let's get into it. Patrick, how are you? How have you been for the past month?
I'm well. Kids are back in school, and I'm getting time to myself. I get to spend my days doing conference calls again. So, I'm happy.
Well, I was going to say, I bet your kids are back in school. Have they brought home any illnesses yet?
Not yet. But I'm avoiding conferences this fall. So hopefully I'll only pick up preschool crud.
Yeah. Hopefully you survive.
Yeah.
All right. Today we're going to talk about the Walmart and Trade Desk news, and then we're going to talk about the actual real end of the de minimis tax exemption, which I've learned I can't spell for the life of me. And then we're going to talk about a mobile dev memo article that covers agentic AI and kind of what's going on. So we're going to have a start with Walmart and the Trade Desk. And it's somewhere in the past month, news broke that Walmart ended the exclusive partnership that they had with the Trade Desk. And that added to a month of some rough press for the Trade Desk. But from what I read, take is that this was inevitable. My question for you is why did Walmart do this now and where are they going next?
So I think it's important to sort of look back with Walmart and other, retailers. And there's always this question of sort of when do they build? When do they buy? When do they partner? And none of those three are static. And so early on with sponsored products, Walmart, looked at it as a partnership and used third parties. And then, over time, they went and they built sponsored products themselves. And so I think sort of as they think through what are their partnerships, what do they buy, i.e. something like a Vizio, or where do they partner? And when they partner, when is it an exclusive partnership or when is it a partnership with, multiple parties? So to me, this just makes a lot of sense. Trade Desk is under, a lot of pressure right now just because their take rate, is so high. And, there's an article that came out the other day just talking about sort of what is sort of the non-working dollars of the various deals with Trade Desk and various retailers. And, and again, all very, very high. And so, if I'm Walmart and ultimately for the brands, because you have absolute closed loop, you can get to real incremental value created. And so you're going to want to sort of squeeze out, the highest amount of non-working dollars as possible while driving the most efficacy. So to me, this does put pressure on the Trade Desk, but it's a really good opportunity for the Trade Desk to think through sort of how do they create value here, not just, on Walmart, but in aggregation across the various retailers as well, which is ultimately, I think Trade Desk is, one of their core strengths.
And I think a lot of the headlines, the way they're written, they would have you believe that Walmart completely axed using the Trade Desk entirely. And that's not the case. It's just the end of an exclusive partnership. And so I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, Walmart would build their own DSP eventually, right? Are they always is there actually a reality that they partner forever?
Yeah, I think they could. I mean, absolutely. We'll see. I mean, it's no company builds everything themselves. Everybody uses Excel or Google Sheets, right? Nobody's building a new spreadsheet. So it's, it's sort of just a matter of sort of strategically for them, should they build, should they buy, should they partner? And I think it's important to look at sort of, every retailer is going through, that decision, matrix and across all the different points of the stack. And so who hosts the website, who does the picking software, who does the ad software, who does the delivery software, who does the physical delivery. And so it's not a binary exercise, but it tends to be because it's software and it's horizontal, it tends to be the bigger that you are, the greater ability that you have to create stuff from scratch. So something like an Amazon is going to create, everything from scratch, just about. And, they'll do some partnerships, but, for the most part, they do it themselves. As you get smaller and smaller, your regional grocery store, you're going to be looking at doing a lot of partnering. And so Walmart is the second largest, is growing rapidly. And so they're going to do more, in-house than likely, other retailers will, but they're not going to do it all. And so, it's sort of, I think for brands, it's sort of recognizing what is, Walmart's optionality and how do these various partners, create value for both the brands, as well as Walmart.
Got it. I'm curious from the advertiser perspective, do you think there's always going to be a world where there's just many DSPs to choose from, or do you see there being consolidation as the years go on in terms of the ones that exist?
There'll be consolidation. There's too many. And it will be what will drive it is, sort of the use of AI, and that people are looking at summaries, and then there are going to be fewer visits to the pubs. And then that will then, that's going to be a bumpy road for, especially second tier publishers without unique content. And then that will then drive down the amount of revenue going through, display advertising. That will then put pressure on the SSPs, the DSPs, and the publishers. There then will be, cream will rise to the top. They will survive. The ones that don't will go away. And then ultimately, I think it's actually good for the web, but we're just not there yet.
Got it. My last question on this one is, you said this kind of news from Walmart lends to be an opportunity for the trade desk. Can you elaborate more on what that opportunity is?
Sure. So to me, it's like, if I'm the trade desk, it's like, yes, this is pressure, but how does the trade desk create something unique that other DSPs can't? And to me, a lot of that is, and that, oh, by the way, Walmart benefits from. And so, one of the things I look at is I think something super useful that the trade desk can do is talk about sort of audience overlap or lack thereof, depending on the targeting expression, cross retailers. And so the trade desk can help brands control, for frequency, cross retailer in a unique way that creates a lot of value for the brands. And so if I'm Walmart and let's say I went on and I said, I'm going to do it myself and I'm not going to talk to trade desk at all, which I don't think they're going to do, but let's say they did. Trade desk could come back and be like, okay, hey brand, well, now there's a challenge that, you have some waste and that you're over frequencing, certain customers. And so I think that's something that, trade desk could focus on. And I know they have in the past.
Got it. That was helpful. I'm proud that my brain was actually thinking that, but I was like, let me have him say it out loud to confirm that I actually have original thought. Okay. Moving us on to the de minimis tax exemption has finally died. It's been laid to rest. And I think, you're seeing headlines all over the place. And a good story, which was inspiration for this, was my boyfriend buys and sells vintage furniture. He's been trying to get this couch from a guy in Italy. Man in Italy, as of this week, can't actually send him the couch because the post office won't send anything to the United States of America. And then he's like, and bro, you got to pay the tariffs if I even can get it over to the US. So I'm curious, and we can talk about impact to China sellers as well. But curious on your thoughts on what this impact looks like globally for some of the marketplaces like Etsy, eBay, even maybe global Shopify businesses.
Yeah. Okay. So that's well done on the lead end, and the corner cases of vintage couches. I like as well. That's well done. That's a good surprise. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because to me, it's it's a conversation. It's Shein and Temu are the easy ones, and okay, they're gonna have a big impact. Blah 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 blah. Okay, fine. Uninteresting. We know that's happening. To me, this what you're pointing at is actually much more interesting in the sense of who are all these smaller retailers who have leveraged the de minimis provision to allow ship directly, from the retailer to an American consumer and not paid any sort of, tariff or tax or, whatever. And so, a lot of brands have built out the infrastructure because the supply chain got to be fast enough that, that it's on my way in a week or two. And it's, Shop Pay works pretty well. And you click the button and it shows up, a week later. And so now there is a sort of a taxation implication here. And so that, to me, the aggregate of all of these, I'll just call them D2Cs, sort of non-American D2Cs that ship to the US, is that then more than just Temu and Shein? And I think it is. And then the other one is also then the sellers on the various marketplaces that were sort of figuring out hey, how do I put in $799 worth of goods, ship it to a buddy and then load it into a Walmart or an Amazon FC. And then what happens there? And so this to me is going to have, far reaching impacts. And oh, by the way, how do you even administer it? Which is to your point, that's going to be its own choppy water. But yeah, this is fascinating.
And I think the other interesting thing that I saw was Essence filing for people who don't know, luxury fashion distributor kind of operation. They filed for bankruptcy protection, and that's all due to tariffs. And they also were yeah, by the way, we're also for things that we can get into the US, the consumer is paying the tariffs because we can't afford that. And I'm oh, but your stuff is already so expensive. That's such a L to take for your consumers, and a lot of it is under that $800 mark. And so it's just fascinating to kind of watch how this impacts all the way from man in Italy trying to sell off his sofa to Essence to the massive Chinese sellers across different marketplaces.
Yeah, I mean, it's the luxe industry in general. It's the margins there are just insane. And then I one time was talking to somebody who had worked for a luxe fashion brand, and I was all right, like give me the really reallys. Like, is this stuff like actually like better made and nicer? She was like, no, it's the same. And it's like, it's the logo.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I was like, yeah. I'm like, all right, good. And like, and it's like, the false scarcity and all that crap. It's just, I don't know. I find it annoying. It's like, if I want to buy a t-shirt, let me buy a damn t-shirt. Like, I'm not queuing up, to buy a damn t-shirt, but whatever.
Yeah, and I also think I'm an avid Etsy user, but Etsy has changed so much over the past few years in terms of like what products are actually on there. And a ton of it is stuff that I think is just like AI generated, slapped on a t-shirt, but it comes over from China or other Asian countries. And I'm thinking about like impact to those businesses. And so it goes farther than what we usually talk about in our day to day.
Well, that's why you just need to visit the Ocean City, Maryland boardwalk, and you can get all of like the awful t-shirt. It's a cultural event for our children. We take them there and point them out, and help them understand their Baltimore heritage.
For sure. We were a Jersey Shore family, but I've also gone to like crazy places in Michigan that also have like the Michigan Great Lakes vibes. And when you're young, you think they're cool. When you're older, you're like, oh, boy, wow.
I wore that. Yeah.
Whoa.
I'm trying to get lots of photos of them wearing that.
I love it. Third story, we're talking about Eric from Mobile Dev Memo put out an article called, I think that it's titled, Agentic AI is a Mirage. And for everyone, I'm going to read some of the last sentences just so that you get all the way to the, what is his final take here? And then he says, agentic commerce as a standalone independent enterprise strikes me as unworkable and untenable, given that it runs counter to the incentive structure of the largest retail platforms. Siphoning consumer attention away from Amazon isn't a function of building a better search experience, but of building a better Amazon. And so reading this article, and when you had sent it, I was kind of, maybe I read the rube wrong, but like, was there mass thinking that agentic AI outside of retailer platforms was going to like blow up our entire industry and that everybody was going to adopt that?
Oh, I think a lot of people think it's going to take off. But to me, it's sort of like, and in certain ways it is, it's just how. And so in what part of like the discovery process or the research process. And so like, you hear certain folks say like, oh, I'm just going to like hand it over to a bot or an agent and the agent's going to do all the things for me. And I'm like, you're going to be a little bit more involved in that. And is it aligned? And even if it can do it, is it aligned, with the economic incentives, of these various platforms, i.e. Amazon and Shopify, especially. And so it's like, if you're doing a high cognitive load or high SKU count, which is then by inherently, higher cognitive load, query, like, yeah, they work great, shifting through stuff and figuring out like where to focus. And it's like, and maybe you don't necessarily have to start with, let's say, Rufus, like like I start with, OpenAI and then it's like, but then I go hop over, to Amazon to figure out sort of what I actually want to buy. And so to me, it's sort of like, but before that, like I was just doing a Google search and then I was doing research and flipping through all the pages. Now I'm like, okay, OpenAI can do it faster. Or maybe sometimes I'm just doing it in Google and Gemini's fast enough, or that Gemini's typically a lot faster than OpenAI. So like I'll use that for like less intensive queries. But if it's like, hey, higher cognitive load, we're buying a car, I'm going to like dig in with OpenAI, go through it, and then I'm going to bounce over to the various sites.
Do you see a future where there is actually commerce functionality built into, and I know that OpenAI has said that they plan on doing that, but like, will that actually work in terms of building commerce functionality within a non-retailer platform?
Yeah, I mean, my guess is what you're going to see is sort of like non-Amazon retailers, non-Amazon, perhaps non Shopify. They look at this as a source of additional traffic and an additional GMV, and so why wouldn't they want it? Like, absolutely. And so they're going to then give feeds of data to the various LLMs in the hope that LLMs send them traffic. If I'm Amazon, it's going to be like, no, I'm going to try to block their crawlers. That's why it's like try to scrape ratings and reviews. It's a lot harder than it used to be. And so Amazon knows they have, some interesting data assets that they don't want others, to take from them. And so they're going to actively try to block them to go in there. And so, it's sort of like, to me, it's just sort of questions like where is it horizontal? Where is it vertical? Amazon's going to want this to be very vertical and they can all do it themselves. The other retailers are going to think it's a little bit more horizontal. But the secondary question is just like, okay, well, what's the decision, process? There was like some research paper that came out that was looking at like, how do the LLMs make decisions? And like these researchers created like a fake site, that looked like Amazon and like, where did how did the LLMs pick? And oh, shocking. Like they act like humans. And so it's a little bit the same as it ever was. It's like, it's price selection and convenience. And so, so it's, I don't know, like in certain ways, it's like, get your catalog right, get all the metadata right. That's absolutely critical. But it's been critical for 20 years. It's just a new sense of urgency. And then LLMs will start to go through and make those decisions.
Got it. And in this article, and as you've mentioned, Eric only talks about Amazon and Shopify. Can you elaborate more on the Shopify side of things? I think everyone understands the Amazon POV and protecting all the way from the point of discovery, but tell us about Shopify here.
So to me, the big question on Shopify is like, who does the checkout? And so, my guess is that OpenAI is going to say, hey, we're going to get you to check out. And maybe the fight would be if OpenAI said like, hey, I want to do like, I'm going to process the payment versus saying, hey, Shopify, you can process the payment. And so my guess is that OpenAI is going to say, hey, you Shopify can, process the payment, which is going to keep them a bit friendlier, than necessarily where, the LLMs will be, with Amazon. So I think it's one part that I think Eric got, a little bit wrong in the sense that if the LLM allows Shopify to process the payment and they're able to then tie it back to, sort of whatever that ID is, I bet they're going to be fine with it. But the key is that Shopify needs to process the payment.
Gotcha. Do you overall agree with the statement that agentic AI is a mirage?
And this is me being an old man and I love it. And I love playing with it. And I think it's transformative, but parts of it, it just reminds me of the hysteria of Alexa 10 years ago. And it's just and everybody thought that they're just going to talk to a speaker and then the speaker was going to then, deliver them, a printer or a monitor or whatever. I don't see it yeah. And the most anybody ever did with Alexa was reorder diapers or perhaps if Amazon did a deep enough discount, you're willing to buy a thing of candy, but that's kind of it. It's tough to you close your eyes and let something do it for you. Do they get to the point where they could? Yeah, but it's sort of on what vector and so I just look at it where are they most useful? And so right now they're most useful in sort of in my mind summarization, aggregate of a whole lot of information and turn it into a table and I can look at it. Love it. I mean that is part of it, but am I willing to say hey, OpenAI, go buy me a car? No. And so but over time will I let it buy my groceries? Maybe, but I don't know, I'm pretty good at buying groceries. It doesn't take that long. Instacart does a good job and Amazon's there. So I don't know. So I don't know. I think it's totally hands off the wheel. I think we're a long ways away from that. I don't even know if people really want it, but it might just be hey, they built a shopping cart for me on Instacart. I go look through it and then I'm okay, cool. That's great. So it's, a little bit of TBD there.
I think obviously being in this industry, we have to be paying attention to what's happening. But when I was talking to Russ from Stratably this morning, we were kind of talking about does anyone in your actual friend circle have any idea what Rufus even is? Do any of your friends, if you said, hey, did you search anything via Rufus? would anybody know who's not?
Well, okay, so let me push back on that. I don't think it matters. And so it's the same as a Gemini. I don't nobody needs to know what Gemini is, but you know what's great? When I go to Google now and I query something and it just gives me a summary and I'm yeah, that's great. That just saved me time. Thanks, Google. And the same thing with Rufus, where it's it starts to get I can use more interesting and longer queries and it gives me results. Or with Instacart, I can talk about recipes and stuff like that. So to me, the branding is secondary, but that's also why it's is this a feature? Is this a product? And so if I'm an incumbent, it's a feature. If I'm OpenAI, it's a product. And so, which is why OpenAI is so focused on driving, user adoption and they're going to figure out the product as they go versus, sort of if I'm Google, if I'm Amazon, it's no, I'm going to stick the feature over all of my products.
Got it. That makes sense. All right. I think that's all of my questions for you. And my AirPods are at 3%.
They made it. All right. We made it. Landed the plane.
And that's it for this month's Commerce News. Join us next month for our recap of what happened and what's interesting in commerce. I'm Emma Irwin, and we'll see you next time.